On our last program, we introduced the subject of the Great Pyramid. We called it The Pillar of Enoch, Lost Legend of the Great Pyramid. The title of this DVD that we've been offering here at Prophecy in the News. And we want to talk with Ken Klein, the man who produced this tremendous video, again on today's Prophecy in the News. Gary Stearman is here, Ken Klein is here. Gary, we've got a lot to talk about.
Well, indeed we do. And JR, the subject matter in The Pillar of Enoch, this DVD, has long been of great interest to both of us. And it's a pleasure to have Ken Klein with us today. Ken, welcome to Prophecy in the News. Let's talk about the Great Pyramid, which most people believe is a tomb. There's this man commonly known as Cheops. Now, that's the term that's you see in common publications, and everybody believes it's his tomb. Let's talk about that.
Yeah, well, it's the basis for that belief goes way back in time, and today it's kind of built upon three what I call dubious facts of history. One is this Herodotus, who is known as the father of history, who in the 4th century BC decided to make a trip to the Giza Plateau where the Great Pyramid was built. And he was like very fascinated, like so many people are with the Great Pyramid. I mean, millions every year go there just to see this incredible, it's the first wonder of the world, and it's the last remaining wonder of the world. And it remains for a lot of reasons that we'll get into later in the program. But he went there about the 4th century BC to try to find out or figure out, you know, who built the Great Pyramid, how it was done, just same kinds of questions we're asking today. And so he went there at least 2,000 years after it was built. I mean, that's about the same distance it is from us to Jesus' time. And that's a lot of time. So how do you pick up on the trail of that? So basically what he did was he talked to the townspeople and learned that this was the tomb of Kufu. That was Cheops is the Greek name. And so then he tried to figure out how long it took to build the Great Pyramid. And he calculated that it took 30 years to build the Great Pyramid. And but when you look into his calculations and look at some of the external factors involved in his calculations, such as you know, how big was the Nile, how deep was the Nile, how did they move the blocks to boats and so forth. Under careful scrutiny, his calculations don't make sense. And yet, if you went to Egypt today and you talked to Dr. Zahi Hawass, the head of the Department of Antiquities, he would stridently hold fast to, yes, Herodotus made the accurate calculations, and that's one of the first tenets upon which the idea of the tomb theory rests. But there's others as well.
Well, let's talk about Kufu. Now, called Cheops, the Grecian form of his name. When we think of statues of pharaohs in Egypt, we think of the big Ramses statue. What, it's got to be like 120 feet tall. And we think of all these incredible statues. Right. Where are the statues of Kufu?
Well, you know, that's one of the things they built it on too, is this statue of Kufu. So I went looking for this statue of Kufu because I saw it in magazines, you know, and I thought, well, there's a statue of Kufu. So I tracked it down at the Egyptian Museum and went inside to look at it. And when I went into this site, I had a guide, by the way, take me in there. And when I saw it, I'm not kidding you, I started laughing. It was so ridiculous. It's this tall.
That tall?
It looks like it's carved out of soap.
Really?
It's 3 inches tall. And it says something, I think his name's written on it. And it was found like several hundred miles from the Giza Plateau.
Wow.
So you're going, well, how do you connect this teeny little statue with the Great Pyramid and make this quantum leap in logic that doesn't make any sense at all? So yet it's one of the tenets upon which they base the whole idea that the Great Pyramid is the tomb of Khufu, and it just is silly.
Yeah, now let me mention that the Greeks call Herodotus the father of history.
Father of history.
But Flavius Josephus, in his writings 2,000 years ago, called Herodotus the father of lies. So that's how much he thought about
Yes.
Herodotus's writings. And there were so many things wrong with the writings of Herodotus that just didn't make any sense when compared to the writings of the Hebrews. And by the way, the writings of Flavius Josephus deal with the antiquities of the Jews. Starts out with creation, talks about Noah, Seth, the flood, Moses, and all of the history of the Jews. And Flavius Josephus says we're correct. And that Herodotus just extrapolated his own ideas into history.
Right. Now, if you look at there's 2.4 million inner core blocks to the Great Pyramid. They average anywhere from 3 to 5 tons each. 2.4 million blocks that had to be carved out, moved across the river, which would have been, when you see how big the Nile is and how it overflooded in the rainy season, so your actual time that you could have worked on the Great Pyramid would have been cut to 9 months, and then they didn't have lights at night, they didn't have night lights. They would have had to lay, to fit into Herodotus's time frame, they would have had to put a stone in place every minute and a half, 24/7 for 20 years, nonstop, to fit into his time frame. And that doesn't even include the time it took to cut out the casing stones, which were 15 tons each and carved on each side to such a precision that when you put them together, it was the distance between the spaces was 1/50th of an inch, which the Egyptians filled with mortar. So this was
who filled with mortar?
They were
the builders of the Great Pyramid.
Put mortar in between the joints.
Okay.
You go, well, what, I mean, if it's 1/50th of an inch, isn't that tight enough? I mean, what's the point of the mortar? And obviously it was to keep out seawater.
Yeah.
They sealed that thing up. And so how long would it have taken? It couldn't have been done in a 20-year period. No way.
And how many casing stones?
The casing stones, we calculated 144,000, which is another interesting
Fascinating number, isn't it?
But there's just no way that Herodotus's calculations were accurate. It would have taken a lot longer.
So basically, the Egyptians didn't build a Great Pyramid.
They did not build a Great Pyramid.
Let's talk about one more thing before we leave this subject. That is that English archaeologists back in the 19th century visited the pyramid, started measuring it and so forth, going inside. One of them claimed to have found an inscription. Now, this brings us to another subject. All over Egypt, everything has inscriptions written on every side of it. But the Great Pyramid is notably free of any form of inscription except for one red ochre inscription that was found by a man named Howard Weiss, and he claimed to have found the name Kufu, and you mentioned this in your video.
Well, anybody that's studied this carefully has come to the conclusion that he was a fraud, that he was looking for a way to fund his expeditions. He was running out of money. He was in a race with this other fellow at the time, and he thought to himself, what could be of more significance than the authorship of the Great Pyramid? And so we know that he dynamited his way into the upper, there's chambers above the king chamber. They're relieving chambers, and there's 5 of them. And so first of all, no sensible archaeologist would use dynamite. Have you ever heard of an archaeologist using dynamite to discover anything? They used toothbrushes and toothpicks not to he dynamited his way into these upper chambers, and he was the only one in there that we know. And strangely, in a strange place, not written well, is the name Kuti, not even Kufu. And of course, this is one of the evidences that Dr. Hawass and the Egyptologists and the traditionalists use as one of the tenets, one of the 3 tenets upon which they build their tomb theory. It's a fraud, and yet it perpetuates to this day. And they protect that dogma. That's why I had to go in there secretly with spy cameras and do all my work underneath the radar, so to speak, to get it done. But most of the world believes that the Great Pyramid is the tomb of Khufu, Cheops, but the fact of the matter is the things upon which this theory rests is all false.
Now, let me ask you a question about this Khufu. There is a stele called the inventory stele. Tell us about how you found it and what it says about the builder of the Great Pyramid.
The inventory, I call it the Stele. Stele is fine. It's
Okay.
S-T-E-L-E. You could pronounce it either way. The inventory Stele was, more was known about it decades ago, and recently the knowledge of it has been covered over. And decades ago, when it was deciphered and understood, it was written on there that Khufu claimed that he was not the builder of the Great Pyramid, that he only was doing repair work on it. Mm-hmm. And that not only was he doing repair work on the Great Pyramid, he was doing repair work on the Sphinx, and that he actually only built 3 smaller pyramids, which would have been pyramids to the southwest of the Menkerios pyramid, which there's 3 great pyramids on the Giza plateau, but there's 3 small pyramids next to the Menkerios. He claimed to have built those for his family members, and they're all in disrepair compared to the other ones.
Yes.
So he never claimed that he was the builder of the Great Pyramid. In fact, he said he was not. So we have this Stele, but now I went looking for this. I went, well, this is really important. To find this Stele and to have the world be able to see it would be proof that this was not built by the Egyptians.
Mm-hmm. And where did you find it?
I went looking for it in the Cairo Museum, and they told me they said no, it's over by the Sphinx. So I went over there looking for it, and I found it, but it's all covered over with wood and metal. You cannot read it even if you want, and nobody's going to open it up. So they're suppressing the truth of it to maintain the integrity of their dogma, which rests on these false tenets. But I think another really fascinating thing is that wherever you go in Egypt, you can go to Luxor, or you can go anywhere, and on their temples, in their tombs, everywhere you look, in the Step Pyramid, down there to the south, to the south of the Great Pyramid. I went underneath you. There's hieroglyphics. There's wall paintings depicting Egyptian life, where you see Egyptians hunting with spears and carrying geese over their shoulders of their kills. Everywhere you look in Egypt, you see wall paintings or hieroglyphics, but you cannot find anything in or on the Great Pyramid or on the Khafra Pyramid or on the Menkerios Pyramid. They have nothing, which is strange. Not only is it strange, it's like so conspicuous by its absence. You have to say, well, why would they miss this? And the only conclusion is because they were built before the Pharaonic period, when they honored the gods of Egypt. There's no honor to any of the gods. You would think that whoever built that would honor the god that he worshipped, but there's nothing. There's not any clue that this was built by the Egyptians. There's not any depiction of Egyptian life either.
Well, the Egyptians were idolatrous. They did not worship Jehovah God. In fact, were opposed to him. And what we have in Isaiah, in that day there shall be an altar to the Lord in the midst of the land of Egypt, and a pillar at the border thereof to the Lord, mentioning the Great Pyramid as an altar to the Lord. How could the Egyptians have built an altar to the Lord? That's the big question.
That's a great thought. I had never considered that before, but that goes right to the very point that we're trying to make here.
Now, the Egyptians are Hamitic. They come from Ham. Shem, Ham, and Japheth were the sons of Noah. The interesting thing about the Hamites is that Cush, his son was Nimrod, who built the Tower of Babel,
yeah.
which appears to be another pyramid. And then after the dispersion of the 3 various lines of the human race into 3 different races, as they traveled from the Mesopotamia Valley to all parts of the world, the Hamitic people went down into Egypt and established the Egyptian dynasty.
That seems like when it started, yes.
Yes, and so the pyramid was already there when they got there.
Yes, and not only did the Egyptians have this egocentricity about them, because you can see it in the giant statues of Ramesses and all these kings. In fact, when you go to Luxor, if you've never been to Egypt, it's fantastic. Luxor is up the Nile. You see these amazing temples built, and every pharaoh built bigger than his predecessor. And so because they want to make their statement, this is who I am, this is my statement. And when you see even Ramesses, his wife is really small compared to how huge he is. And you see these gigantic, that's what makes this little statue of Khufu such a joke. And so they were very egocentric, trying to outdo their predecessors. But when you get to the Giza Plateau, the first pyramid that was built was the Great Pyramid, the first wonder of the world, the only remaining, and every one of them shrunk. So the pharaonic egocentricity is not contained in the 3 pyramids on the Giza Plateau, because each subsequent pyramid is smaller. And when you couple that together with the fact that they're in alignment with the stars in the belt of Orion, this seems to be like a reflection of it's like a star map on Earth trying to tell us something. So this was built with such precision and with such an attention to the stars that it goes beyond the capacity of primitive people carrying geese over their shoulders and holding spears. Where did this technology come from? It certainly couldn't have come from the Egyptians. They didn't have it.
Now today, if you take the surface of the Earth and take all of the mountains and figure up the highest mountain and the lowest valley, and then you put it all down into a mean altitude, that is an average altitude of the planet, it would be exactly the height of the Great Pyramid.
That's correct.
So the Great Pyramid was built to the height of the average
mean altitude
of
the Earth.
Of the entire Earth. Now that is a technology that just is beyond the capability of ancient Egyptians.
Well, not only that, but they had to be the greatest land surveyors ever, because they actually built the Great Pyramid exactly in the center of the Earth in relationship to the land mass. They didn't have ships to travel the ocean to draw maps. They didn't have satellite pictures. They did this without a compass. to be able to, not only that, they built it on probably the only place that would maintain the weight of that, which was a solid granite plateau. And it's right at the center of the crescent of the Nile. So to be placed in this spot where it was, for all that criteria to come into play, could only have been done at the Giza Plateau, and they found it. How did they find that if it wasn't from some kind of supernatural intelligence telling them where to build it? Most likely, this is the foundation stone of the earth that was spoken to Job. Where were you when I built the foundation stone of the earth? A prophecy that points to the Almighty. And it was built in the only place that it could have been built.
Now when Moses built the tabernacle, God said, build it according to this pattern, and God gave him the pattern to build the tabernacle. When Noah built the boat, I'm confident that God gave him the plans to build the ship to save the world. Well, whoever built the Great Pyramid, and most likely the sons of Seth, Enoch, the
7th generation from Adam,
the considered builder of the Great Pyramid, 7th generation, when he built this thing, he also got plans from God. That's my point.
Yeah, well, and it says that Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. But what's interesting about that word God that we get in our modern translations is the word Elohim. And Elohim is the plural of Eloah. Eloah is only mentioned one time in all the Bible. It's most likely where the Arabs got the name Allah from, was from Eloah. We think that's the case. But Elohim is the plural of the Almighty. So Enoch walked with Elohim. Enoch walked with angels. And it was angels that came in, according to 1 Chronicles 28:18, in ships, which is fascinating, and counseled him and taught him how to build this thing, the dimensionality of the science that would have to go into it. The pyramid is built in such a way that the base is actually curved on each side at the same proportion as the circumference of the earth. So Enoch knew, and the people that built the pyramid knew, that the earth was round at least 3,000 years before Christ, a knowledge that wouldn't come to us until, what, 12, 13, 14? Well, they were still arguing that the earth was flat during Columbus's time. So these people had supernatural knowledge.
Yes, Ken, I wanted to get into the subject of mathematics. Entire books have been written about the mathematics of the Great Pyramid. And for literally millennia, mathematicians chased the value of pi, that is squaring the circle. to find the area or the circumference of a circle.
Right.
And they searched for this transcendental number that would do the conversion, which we think of as 3.1415.
1519 or 17.
It goes out actually infinitely.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a transcendental number. It's called a transcendental number because it comes to no discernible end.
Right.
This number is engraved in virtually every block of the Great Pyramid. It's just part of the pyramid, right?
Yeah, they not only did they know pi, they knew phi, which is another esoteric number. So these people were masters at knowing universal equations and mathematics that when you think about that, I mean, I barely can wrap my mind around it.
Yeah.
I didn't do too good in physics and geometry in school. I was more interested in football, but
yes.
But it's a very amazing thing that thousands of years before Christ, these people had mastered these equations and numbers and actually integrated that into the building of the Great Pyramid. So the Great Pyramid is actually squared to the earth in such a way that it's been able to withstand the ravages of time and earthquakes, and still today is a prophecy that we're just beginning to understand.
Well, the calculations, for example, the distance from the equator to the pole, the distance from the earth to the sun, all kinds of calculations. How could anyone have known these things?
And brought it all into this and built it into stone.
Right.
So that it would endure, like paper would have burned or been destroyed in the flood. So we have it encrypted into this incredible repository of information.
And I should say that this sounds complicated as we're discussing it, but in fact, on your video, you make it relatively plain with diagrams and so forth. So it brings it down to the level where everybody can understand.
Yeah, we went to great pains to make animations of those diagrams so people it would have a great visual.
Tell us about the ball and sockets.
Oh, that's another thing that's remarkable. The Great Pyramid is built in an earthquake zone. And so what they did was that at each corner of the pyramid, they built into the ground a notch. It's probably 6 to 8 inches in depth, so if there was an earthquake, the pyramid wouldn't slip and move around. It was like a ball and socket joint that we'd have in some of our big skyscrapers today, so that it would actually hold the Great Pyramid in place. And that pyramid hasn't even moved a fraction of an inch in over 5,000 years.
Never settled.
It's never settled even a fraction of an inch. And from one side,
I've got a driveway made with concrete, and it's cracked all to pieces. So.
You know,
I know what you're talking about.
That's another thing. When you look, for example, at the Third Dynasty pyramids, and knowing that the Third Dynasty only lasted 50 years, and the theory is that the builders of the Great Pyramid advanced the knowledge of the Third Dynasty to the Fourth Dynasty, which is the alleged time that the Great Pyramid was built. And then you go to the Fifth Dynasty, there's a quantum leap from the Third to the Fourth Dynasty, and a return to the technology of the Third Dynasty and the Fifth Dynasty that the Egyptian historians can't explain. So how come this jump and then return back to this?
Obviously, the Great Pyramid was built before Egypt was Egypt.
It was built before Egypt was Egypt.
Before the flood. When the people got there and established the Egyptian culture, then they started trying to build more pyramids.
Copies.
And they were very, very poor.
Inferior. They just tried to make copies of it, and somehow it became their religious idolatrous worship was pyramids. So this is an amazing thing. It came from the pyramid, came from the sky, the Great Pyramid.
I'd like to point out one thing as we approach the end of our broadcast today. Isaiah 19:20, referring to this Great Pyramid, says, "And it shall be for a sign and for a witness unto the Lord in the land of Egypt." So this thing is not a pagan tower of some kind. It's a sign and a witness to the Lord. I like that idea.
No, it says Lord of hosts.
Thank you.
Angels.
Angels. Well, I just want to thank Ken Klein and say that this is exciting for me. We're going to continue our studies. I know that you're studying even now to do another video.
Yes, that's true.
Well, thanks for being here.
Well, Gary and JR, thanks for having me on the program.
This is J.R. Church and Gary Sturman. Until next time, keep looking up.